Greetings from Mansarovar Global University. On behalf of the university, I welcome our distinguished speakers, Professor Radhesham Sharma and Dr. Kaustubh Sharma, and all those participants who have joined us in this webinar, and also those who are listening this program through YouTube program. Today, the world is celebrating World Environment Day, and we all know that the healthy environment is very, very important for our survival. And the theme of this year's World Environment Day is to restore ecosystems. And it is important that we should restore and focus on the degraded ecosystems and also focusing on flora and fauna at the same time. Today's webinar is being organized jointly with the National Academy of Sciences, India. And before we proceed further, I would invite Dr. Shefali Tripathi, who is head of the MBA department of Mansarovar Global University, to introduce the first speaker, Professor Radhesham Sharma. Dr. Shefali.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Dr. Raj, who is presently working as a professor in the Department of Environmental Studies at University of Delhi. Dr. Sharma is specialized in the field of ecology, bioremediations, and biotechnologies. His several research papers has published in national and international journals like Nature, Journal of Hazardous Materials, Journal of Environmental Management, environmental research. He is a skilled trainer member for MIT, Cambridge, USA, IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management, UNCCD Core Group, World Bank aided projects, and many more. Sir, we welcome you and request you to kindly share your immense thought and experience today on World Environmental Day.
Thank you. First of all, I thank you, Professor Arun Kumar Pandey, my dear colleague and our Vice Chancellor of this university, and other colleagues from the Department of Environment who have invited us to interact with the participants and share our thoughts that what we have been doing and what we think and what we visualize, then how India can also play a significant role along with different researchers and young generations. So thank you very much once again. So I'll just share my thoughts using one presentation. I think all of you can see the presentation. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, now we are going to discuss in the next couple of minutes about the ecosystem restoration and how it can play a significant role in our life and what we can do as a student of ecology and environment, or otherwise, even if we are from some other discipline. See, I was reading one book by a Colombian psychologist on where a boy takes a walk of Manhattan streets of 5 miles along with his dog. Yeah. So, and whenever he takes a walk along with there are 11 walks in this field, in this book. And whenever he goes for a walk, he takes a different expert, sometimes political scientist, or historian, psychologist, clinical scientist, or ecologist and environment and so on. So each walk gave a different set of information depending upon the experts. So the walk was, say, it was same 5-mile street, but it gave a different set of information. So that means whenever we talk about the sustainable development, ecosystem restoration, its relevance in your life or ecology and so on, it depends on the perspective. It depends on the expert. So depending upon the expert, we perceive the problem in a different way and we try to provide a solution accordingly. So whether we are working hardcore ecology, environment, wildlife, or social science, or psychology, or language, so that means we can contribute to the same problem and the same, what do you say, to achieve the goal of sustainable development. So, and similarly, we can provide the solution to those challenges. So that means if you look at carefully, the irrespective of the discipline, we are working with the same goal, to have a good quality of life, so that we can contribute significantly in the society as well as in the for the ecosystems at large. So we'll go for a walk for another 30-35 minutes. And I'm a student of ecology, so I'll give you the perspective from the student as a student of environment and ecology. See, there was one interesting paper which was published in Science in 2012, which says it's a good news for the teenagers that our teenagers of this time are going to live under 125 years. It's a good news. So they are going to have long life, no doubt. So teenagers are lucky this time. So now, if you ask me whether it is real or not, so if you look at the carefully, that some of the cancer patients which used to live 4 or 5 months and 20 years back, now they live happily for a couple of years and with the good quality of life. So that means medical advancement ensure that long lifespan of our teenager. So when it was a debatable, so some group of people again, debated that whether it is real or not. In 2018, again, another paper was published and which explained, yes, it's real. In fact, it can be a little bit more. So this good news is real. So there is no doubt. But at the same time, there is another reality in which we are living. So the whole generations are at risk. Our generations are at risk. So at one hand, we are saying they are going to live long. At the same time, we are saying they are at risk. So that means they may have good life, long life, no doubt. But at the same time, what would be the quality of life? That's a challenge, and which is real. Now, if you look at the cancer patients, they're living long, no doubt. But at the same time, the number of cancer patients have increased. And that happened because then the risk group of cancer patients have increased. Because now we are exposed to those toxicants and genotoxicant and carcinogens more because of change in lifestyle and so on. So the number of cancer patients are increasing, though then they are living long life and so on. So we want to minimize this risk group, and that can happen only when we remove those toxicants and we restore our environment and we remedify our environment. So if you look at last 20 years, what has happened, if there is a global data which we analyze, in last 2 decades, there are a large number of epidemics which have emerged across the globe differently. Let me tell you, in late 90s and early 2000 onwards, the emergence of epidemics have increased at the global scale, and which has culminated as a pandemic in now 2020. That's why we are meeting online. So COVID-19, there can be many causes for emergence of these diseases, no doubt. But one of the important root cause of these emergence of epidemics and now pandemic is degraded ecosystem. The destroyed habitats has created a perfect conditions for emergence of coronavirus, because it's a man-wildlife conflict. Because of that, this virus has emerged, and now we are witnessing the pandemic. So major challenge is degraded ecosystems and contaminated ecosystems. And we need to provide a solution. How we can provide a solution? Our young researchers, young scholars, and young scientists, they can play a very significant role, let me tell you, to achieve the goal of ecological, restoration. And if we adopt the principle in our life, in our society, in our functioning, in our government, in our budget, at the global scale, if we adopt this principle of I'm second, that means we can achieve the goal of sustainable development. We can restore our ecosystem. You may ask me, what do you mean by I'm second? I'm second means human being is second. Then who is first? The first is nature. So that means if we adopt this principle that nature is first and we are second, that means we can achieve the goal, because that will be integrated in our lifestyle, in our policies, in our budget, in our industries, in our society, and at all level of social organization. That means we are just going close to the sustainable development. And the solution as an academician is we visualize that we need to train our scholars and young faculty in the principle of ecological entrepreneurship, so that they can develop some ideas, new opportunities, not only to restore the ecosystem, but also to make the profit. That means we need to learn from the nature and convert those nature-based principles and ideas based on ecology and environment to marketable products and processes, so that we can generate revenue. At the same time, we can restore our ecosystems, we can ensure the industrial sustainability, we can restore our environment as well. So I'm thankful to the university and Professor Pandey to invite me to share my views that what I've been doing for past more than 20 years, and then what I've learned as a student by doing research. So we'll discuss about the ecosystem integrity and its linked with the personal excellence and sustainability. What are the toolkits which are available for restoration of ecosystems, and what are the new opportunities which we can visualize that in next 10 years or 20 years can play a significant role at the global scale. See, then there's one Scottish philosopher, Adam Smith. He wrote a very interesting book in 1760s and so on, Wealth of Nation, where he highlighted there are three factors which play a significant role in wealth of nation: labor, capital goods, land or natural resources. So if you examine the first industrial revolution focused on labor, mechanization, where the UK, Western UK was the major beneficiary, and it took 150 years to double its GDP. If you look at the second industrial revolution, America, Canada, Japan, Australia, Russia, they were the major beneficiary, and where America took 50 years to double its GDP. And the focus was on second factor, capital goods, infrastructure. If you look at the third and fourth industrial revolution, digital revolution, and the nature-based revolution, which is based on land or natural resources. So that means third factor came into existence in third and fourth industrial revolution. That's why we are discussing about the ecosystem restoration. So this idea which emerged in 1700, it is real. Now, what happened in the first industrial revolution? 13% of the world population moved from below poverty line to the middle class. No, good. And in the second industrial revolution, again, the 17% of the world population moved from below poverty line to the middle class. Now, the third and fourth industrial revolution, where we are witnessing and we are watching it, 3.5 billion people are going to move from below poverty line to middle class. 1 billion have already moved. Around 2.5 billion people are there in transition phase. Now, what is the current status? More than 65% of the Earth's surface is degraded or contaminated. So that means the stress on the natural resources is already heavy. That's why the UN has announced this century as the century for restoring the Earth. UN has announced this decade, UN decade 2021 to 2030, the decade of ecosystem restoration. So that means ecosystem restoration is a scientific principle where we need to train our scholars so that they can participate effectively, not only in generating primary data and long-term data, but also convert the ecological theories into marketable products and processes so that they can generate revenue and they can lead the market. So now we are mostly talking about the 6 trillion, 3 trillion, or 12 trillion economy. That's very important because the stock market is important to run the country economy, no doubt. But the nature also provides more than 145 trillion US dollar of benefit annually without any investment from human being. So when we are concerned with 6 or 12 trillion US dollar, we must also focus on protecting the natural wealth, natural stock of which we get every year, benefit of 145 trillion US dollar. And their benefits are large. For example, if you take example of tsunami, if you take example of some cyclones in Odisha or West Bengal, or cloudburst in Uttarakhand, or floods in Jammu Kashmir, what is really happening in last 20 years is you can witness very carefully that wherever the tsunami occurred in Chennai and in Nicobar group of islands, the impact was very heavy wherever the mangroves and ecosystems were degraded. Okay, but the impact was only up to 500 meters when the ecosystems were protected. It happens only in Odisha, it happens in West Bengal, in recent cases also. In case of Uttarakhand, the cloudburst is a natural phenomenon, but the challenge happened because more than 40% of the ecosystems were degraded in the last 35 years in upstream of Himalaya. Similarly, in flood occurs in the history of Jammu Kashmir for the first time because we destroyed the wetlands. More than 35% of the wetlands are destroyed. So that's why these ecosystems provide insurance against these natural calamities. So if we protect these ecosystems and restore these ecosystems, we are again providing and creating a safety net against these natural calamities. Let me verify. So these restoring ecosystem will be purchasing in insurance policy. And insurance policy is like that. For example, if somebody takes a life insurance policy, that person will lose his life, then the benefit goes to the family. But this kind of insurance restoration ecosystem and this insurance policy, if you purchase and invest right time, that you will derive the benefits in your lifetime. Your family will be benefited, society will be benefited, nature will be benefited, nation will be benefited, and even the future generation will derive the benefit. So such kind of insurance policy never exists. So we must invest in restoring ecosystems. Take example of many groundwater recharge. See, in Delhi, there are many areas where everybody would like to purchase a flat, but we don't have water. And why it has happened? Because of unscientific development. There are certain areas which are known as aquifers, where the ground recharge take place, that was concretized. And whatever small rain comes, it goes to the Nadi and Nala as a surface runoff. So abstraction of water was very heavy, and the groundwater recharge was less. So that's why we are suffering from groundwater. So groundwater services is another important service which we get from ecosystem across the country. You can see there are many cities now in India which are facing zero groundwater. So these are the benefits which we get. India is rich in cultural diversity, another kind of benefit which we get from ecosystem. Why India is rich in cultural diversity? Because we are rich in biodiversity and ecosystem diversity. If you take example of rituals and traditions in North India and South India, East India and West India, they're quite different because we interact with the different kind of ecosystem and bioresources. So that's why our rituals are different. Rituals of agriculture community is different than that of nomadic community. And their rituals and traditions are different from fishery community because they interact with different ecosystem and different bioresources. So that's why if our ecosystems are threatened, if our biodiversity is threatened, our cultures are equally threatened. We will lose the cultural diversity as well. So in biodiversity and cultural diversity, they are critically linked. Now then what we should do? There are certain kind of services which are known as supporting services, soil formation, nutrient cycling, and primary productivity. So basically, in short, soil health is the supporting services. If our soil health is intact, that means there will be continuous flow of $145 trillion worth of benefit. But what we have done in the last 300 years, we have destroyed the very foundation of our civilization, healthy soil and healthy water. So now since our foundation is weak, so how we can achieve the goal of sustainable development? And that's how the restoration ecology focus on restoring the supporting services, the very foundation of civilization, the soil health. Now, if you look at the sustainable development goal, whether they are at the societal level or economic level, the foundation remains the ecosystems and biosphere. So that means the very foundation of societal and economic goal is nothing but our ecosystems. Now, I want to compare these ecosystems as the large cap stocks. If you know, some of you know the stock market, and people suggest that I don't want to suggest you that you go to the stock market, but I'm just for sake of discussion, I'm comparing. In stock market, there are two principles. One is you should enter into the market much early in your life. And the second principle is you must invest in diversified funds. That means mid cap, small cap, and large cap funds. Mid cap and small cap funds are those which are emerging companies. If you invest 1 rupee, you get 100 and 1,000 rupees because gain is more. But at the same time, they are risky. So that means you may lose even 1 rupee also. So people advise that you may invest in mid cap and small cap, but you must also invest in large cap funds. And these large stocks are nothing but multinational companies which have a global presence. So they run the market. So even if market is collapsing, they're strong, they retain the market, and their fluctuation is less. So investing in the large cap funds is must, even if you are purchasing the mid cap and small funds. I want to say then whenever we are talking about the development plan, the developing the infrastructure, road, industries, and the buildings and so on, flats, these are nothing but small cap and mid cap funds. And investing in ecosystems is just like a large cap fund. So whenever we are doing the city planning, we must integrate the ecosystems as an integral part of development plan. So ecosystems should be considered as large cap funds because they consider if you compare the their features of large cap stocks market and the ecosystem, they're same. Because in case of multinational companies, there are advisors which are recruited at a higher top-notch experts. They are recruited so they can play and they can invest your money in the right stock and so on. Similarly, in case of nature, the plants and microbes have been recruited by the nature over 1 million year selection. So that means recruitment of those plants and microbes and animals and insects by the nature is over a period of time. So selection process is very heavy. So they govern the ecosystem, and that's how they provide large number of goods and services, not like small and mid cap funds, which are responsible for giving only few benefits. And large cap companies, they provide diversified funds. So similarly, ecosystems do provide diversified funds, and they have a stability, and their role is well known. Their reputation is very high. So we know in case of Uttarakhand, in case of West Bengal, in case of Jammu Kashmir, in case of Chennai, in case of Nicobar Group of Islands, our ecosystems, their reputation is well established. They provide safety net to our communities, no doubt. So that means we should restore these ecosystems for to get the large benefits of $145 trillion. Now you may ask me, the nation will get something, society will get in the cultural diversity, what I will get. See, there are studies which are available. If we commune with the ecosystems in nature for 30 minutes a week, so that means we work on worthy goals. Right now, what we are suffering from is our young generation is nature deficit disorder. If you take the Maslow's law of hierarchy of needs, and he's a Harvard psychologist who has given a very good model that how we have the lower order of needs and higher order of needs. We have lower level of subconsciousness and higher order of subconsciousness. And if you look at the people who have achieved excellence in their life, let me tell you, they are working at the 5th and 6th level of subconsciousness. And then most of us die with the 3rd and 4th level of subconsciousness. Let me tell you, there is a global survey that you ask the 100 people of 25 years or 30 years age, ask them, what do you want to do in your life? They will say they want to contribute significantly into the society and the nation, no doubt. And they want to earn good money so that they can support their family. And they want to do something big and contribute significantly to the field of their research or their studies and so on. But you ask the same set of 100 people when they reach to the 55, 60 or 65 years, what happened in your life? You will find that 4 to 5 people will say that we have achieved excellence. So some 4 or 5 will say they are doing good. And most of them will say, yes, they are doing well and they're supporting the family and they're happy. So that means the individual who is born with some kind of natural potential, who is unique, they could not realize their potential in their life. So people are born, but they are not reached to that potential. Why I'm asking, discussing this? India is the youngest country. India is youngest country in the sense that we have the young population, which is in large population, but it is only a potential. Unless this potential is realized in some kind of services at the society, in the nature, in the ecosystems, or in the market at the national and global level, that potential will never be able to contribute significantly. So why? Because then excellence lies at the higher order of needs. Most of the time, people struggle in the lower order of needs, but they do not work at the higher level of subconsciousness. So that means excellence lies at the higher level. And if you look at carefully, the lower order of needs are being met by ecosystems. So our ecosystems are healthy. So that means we are providing our young generation to move much early in their 5th and 6th levels of subconsciousness to achieve the excellence. Let me tell you. So right now, what is happening? If we look at carefully, millions of years and billions of years, we remained with the ecosystems. We evolved along with the ecosystems and biodiversity. Our genome has evolved along with the biodiversity. Let me tell you, more than 100,000 generations we were in the wild with the ecosystems. It is only 400 to 600 generations we came to the villages and cities. So it's only very minuscule amount of human evolutionary scale. We are in the villages and cities. So we want to live. We have evolved along with the biodiversity. That's why we are suffering from what is known as nature deficit disorders. If we look at the young generation right now, at 11 minutes, something they get distracted. Let me tell you. Some WhatsApp message will come, some mobile SMS will come. We want to see it. There's an urge, natural urge to see, and somebody is selling some kind of some message, and which is of no use. We get distracted, and 20 minutes it takes to refocus it. So that means we are struggling hard in getting focus and refocus, and we are not able to work on our worthy goals. I'm going to ask my young scholars and young faculty, then how much time we have spent on our life's worthy goal in last 1 year, 1 month, 1 week, or yesterday? Because see, we are suffering because we have transformed ourselves from nature smart to nature deficit human beings, where decreased creativity, decreased cooperation, reduced focus is common. So when our young generation is suffering from some kind of diseases because of increase in exposure to ecotoxicants, so then there are some of the health disorders which were uncommon, now common in young people. Now they are also challenged with the lack of focus, and because of they are not communing with the nature, and so their brain waves are work at high frequency, and the excellence will never be common. Let me tell you. So we want that ecosystem services should be restored so that we can achieve the high quality of life. So this is a major challenge right now. Now, how we can do it? So there are toolkits from a student of ecology if we want to suggest how we can restore our ecosystem. Our aim is, what is our aim? Aim is 145 trillion US economy, no doubt, 145 trillion economy from the nature's market. And our aim is social diversity should be maintained because ecosystems are intact, then cultural ritual diversity is more. Then we want to achieve excellence so that we can focus it. We have good health and good relation. Let me tell you. So that means these are the twin goals. How we can achieve? We can achieve by ensuring the flow of ecosystem services, and the foundation of ecosystem services on the left-hand side. the population, genes and species and communities and ecosystem. When we protect these populations, communities, ecosystem, wildlife, and ecosystem, then that means we are ensuring the ecosystem services, and these ecosystem services will provide and ensure the quality of life on the right hand side. There can be large number of definitions of quality of life, but universal definition is we should have security, we should have basic material for good life, we should have security for health and good social relations. Now, I'm asking that people who are rehabilitated in Chennai or Nicobar or in Odisha or West Bengal or Jammu Kashmir or Uttarakhand, whether they have been rehabilitated, they are doing well in their life. So that means we need to assess the security. Basic material for good life. Yes, we have surplus food, no doubt, but whether this food is rich in nutrients, whether this food is having less ecotoxins. Okay, even if we have food and availability of food is not problem, but whether it is accessible to all. So these are the questions to define the quality of life. And looking at the health, you know it. I mean, whether health facilities are available to all and so on. So that means if we look at the carefully, the economic indicators are quite strong in many parts of the world, including India, no doubt. Whatever we could not afford in past 20 years, now we can afford, our family can afford. Economic indicators are quite strong, but we need to ensure the health indicators and environmental indicators, as well as the ecosystem indicators and so on. If those indicators are strong, only then we have, or social indicators, they are strong, that means we have good quality of life. So focus on the right hand side. This is the highest and ultimate aim of good quality of life. We should have what is known as freedom of choice and action. Because this example I've discussed several times, whenever Indians, they go to different parts of the world in developed countries, UK, America, or many developed countries, we do wonder in 1 year or 2 years. When we come back, so we still do good, no doubt at the same time, but the flow of and the rate and the pace is slightly different. So because why? In developed countries, the issues of security, basic material for good life, health, and other things are not problem. What we work is we work on worthy goals on the right hand side, freedom of choice and action. But in developing countries, most of the people, when they start struggling on other parameters as well. So the freedom of choice action is not the one which they always exercise. So if we want that our young generation should be able to contribute significantly and lead at the global level in all ventures, including the ecological entrepreneurship, we should provide an ecosystems and health environment where they are not worried about the lower order of needs. They focus on the highest level of quality of life, that is freedom of choice and action. That can happen only when we restore and protect our ecosystems. So how we can restore it? See, there is a center called Center for Environmental Management of Degraded Ecosystems in University of Delhi. And you know, there are a large group of scientists in the leadership of Professor C.R. Babu. They are working on ecosystem restoration. I got a chance to work with the group on this Bhatti mine. So this is a abundant mines in Delhi. And this abundant mine is more than 80 years or 100 years old, and thing goes. All the afforestation program failed. Whatever green patch you are seeing is there nothing but invasive and weedy species. Otherwise, there is no soil, no organic matter, no moisture, no nutrient, full of ecotoxicants. So it is difficult. So but economic activities are important. We cannot stop it. So we are not against economic activity, but whatever we have created such sites which are economic burden, ecological challenge, environmental hazards, we must restore such sites to make them biological productive, as well as these environmental hazards and economic burden should be translated into socio-ecologically significant sites. So it should be restored. So, and how we can restore? The idea is we should go back to the nature and learn from the nature. So there are certain plant species which are like wild legumes and grasses. They play significant role in processing the habitat and make it suitable to for other native plant species. So that means in restoration ecology, ecosystem restoration, we don't want to make the area green. We want to restore those plant communities, insect communities, and animals which used to exist in those areas, because 145 trillion US dollar is associated with not with the green area, but with the ecosystems, the natural wide ecosystem. So that's how the restoration ecology is different. And we need to introduce those species which are characteristic of wild species, or those wild ecosystems, which should come back. And this center, which I told you, the CEMD, has restored such areas and demonstrated that this technology can work. So this technology can not only work in the field, and they have restored it. And after restoration, now they have transferred the technology to the stakeholders like forest department and mining industry. So they're restoring the rest of the area. So that means ecosystem restoration is a reality. It's not only myth, it's not only hypothesis, it's a reality that can be translated into the field. So similarly, this center is now, providing the technological know-how to different industries and different stakeholders at the national and international level. So we also worked on thermal power plants, where you have the fly ash dumps, which are also rich in hazardous substances, heavy metals, cocktail of heavy metals and other organic contaminants. We use the same principle of plant microbe associations, identifying the right group of microbial communities and plants which are ecologically important and socio-ecologically relevant, and which has been restored. Now that means ecosystem restoration can be done. It is a reality. Now there are institutes who are practicing it in University of Delhi, like CEMD. Now that means it can be done. Now what new opportunities are available that we must investigate, because we should move to the next level of ecological restoration. What is the next generation restoration practices? What are those rules and tools which can be useful for restoring the ecosystem? We need to train our students in the field of ecological entrepreneurship so that they play a significant role in restoring the ecology, restoring the ecosystem, but they can also contribute significantly to the economic development. Let me tell you. This is a story which I have narrated several times in different lectures, let me tell you, but it's very close to my heart. See, in the field of Olympics in 1968, something unique happened which has created a history in the field of Olympics. So there is a high jump, okay? And high jump, there are different type of jump, western roll, crisscross and scissor and so on. Until 1968, nobody could break an Olympic record of high jump, which was 5 feet at 8 inches. Nobody could do it. It was very difficult. Every time there was nobody. But one little known man who was standing in the queue to create a history in the field of Olympics, his name was Dick Fosbury. He jumped and created a new kind of jump. And to recognize his contribution in the field of Olympics, that jump is known as Fosbury flop. What he did is, when he jumped and reached the bar, so he turned his body, okay, and then head entered first rather than the legs. And then he broke the record. And he not only broke the record, but he created a history. By net, 5 feet 8 inches, nobody was able to break that record. He not only broke the record, 7 feet 4.5 inches. The difference was not of 1 centimeter, 1 inch, or 2 inch, or 5 inch. You can see the difference: 5 feet 8 inches, 7 feet and 4.5 inches. Why? Because the problem was same. His perception about the problem, thinking about the problem, identifying the solution to that problem, he changed the mindset. So that means we know the problems right now, whatever is happening in our field, but what new perspective we can give, what new idea we can use to provide a solution. Here, then the novelty lies. So we must understand the problems and we must change our mindset, identifying the new perspective and provide the new solutions. Then we can create a history in our field. For example, somebody who is working in the field of economics or social science or psychology, environment, ecology, biochemistry, environmental science, and so on. We must identify whether we are doing research or whether we are doing teaching or we are doing anything. We must identify what is the Fosbury flop in our life. What could be the Fosbury flop? Once we identify that Fosbury flop, that means we can contribute significantly in our field. What is my Fosbury flop? What is my dream in the restoration practices? This is what I'm going to share. I want to develop a new next generation of restoration practices. And I want to use the socio-biological theories of living organisms, how these organisms live in the environment. So these ecological theories are available, they are there. We must understand it. We must analyze it. We must translate these ideas into marketable products and processes. Let me tell you. And for example, bacterial viruses. When we say virus, we are already scared because of COVID-19. We are hiding inside the house as a hunter-gatherer. So no, we are scared of viruses. But similarly, when we say bacterial viruses, so that means they are threat to bacteria. These viruses kill the bacteria. This is what we know, they're killer. And these bacteria are useful for soil formation, nutrient cycling, and primary productivity. These bacteria play a significant role in developing restoration practices along with the wild plants. So that means we consider bacterial viruses as a threat to our bacteria, useful bacteria, which can play a significant role in restoration. But I want to say bacterial viruses are killer, but they are useful as well. This is what we need to think about the restoration practice. You may ask me how and why. See, we must not forget bacterial viruses multiply inside the bacterial cell. If they kill the bacterial host completely, that means they will also die. They will not able to multiply. So during stress and degraded environment, during environmental stresses, they come for rescue of the bacterial host. They provide certain genes for environmental fitness in these bacterial hosts, for phosphate solubilization, for stress tolerance, for photosynthesis and so on, so that their bacterial hosts survive. And once the bacterial hosts survive and multiply in large number, these bacteria, then they start killing it so that they can also multiply. So this kind of cycle exists in nature. So that means bacterial viruses are useful. They do not allow the bacterial host to die in a stress and degraded environment. And this is our focus, that in degraded ecosystems, we want our bacteria should survive. So we must learn from the nature that how in nature these bacteria are surviving. They are surviving because of many factors, including the bacterial viruses. So we must identify those bacterial viruses which are useful so that we can improve and develop next generation of restoration practices. It's a very unique group of organisms. See, in evolution, what happens? In evolution, we need variations. Variations are the raw material for evolution. And then you need to have the selection pressure which act on those variations so that evolution occurs. Bacterial viruses, by providing the genes and certain or influencing the gene, they create variations in bacterial population. So that means they are the driver of creating variations. And by killing them, they act as a selection pressure. So these organisms, they're acting at the lower level of creating variations, at the higher level to create the selection pressure. So they govern the evolution of bacterial community, let me tell you. At the individual level, they provide fitness to the bacterial host. At the population level, they create variations in the bacterial population. At the level of community, when some bacterial species try to dominate, they kill it and bring it down the population, then they create ecological niche for other species to grow. So that means at the community level, they maintain the species richness in microbial community, and you'll be surprised and to know that at the ecosystem and biome at the global level, more than 2/3 of carbon nitrogen cycle is because of bacteriophage mediated bacterial mortality. So bacterial viruses are governing the more than 2/3 of carbon nitrogen cycle at the global level. So such organisms which are playing important role at all level of ecological organization, ranging from molecule to individual to population to community to ecosystem and biome. So they should be integrated in our restoration practices. This can be a fosbury flop, let me tell you. Even if you are interested in basic science, for example, some of the students, they like to work on basic science and fundamental science to improve the knowledge. So that is also useful, because when we worked on some of the viruses on Vibrio, then we could identify the new Vibrio and contribute to the new order, the family, the classification of bacteriophages, which came in 1960s until 2018, more or less, it was same. But when we contributed in the new order, it was completely changed in 2018, and this paper was published in Nature. So that means you can also work on academic level or fundamental level as well. So that means if we integrate these bacterial viruses in plant microbe technology, then on the right hand side, what you will have, the accelerated restoration ecology. Let me tell you, accelerated restoration, ecosystem restoration. Because once we integrate the bacteriophages, then survival of bacteria, multiplication of bacteria, colonization of bacteria, and their ecological function will be improved. This is what we visualize as a fosbury flop in the restoration practices. And we do have a simple bacterial viruses like filamentous phages, where you can express the protein, peptides, antibodies of any kind on their surfaces, and they can serve as a biomonitoring tool, because we want to monitor what is happening to the pathogens into the environment, the viruses and bacteria, and the microbe which you have inoculated into the soil and water, so that you can monitor their fate. So, and you can identify the threat much early in the ecosystem restoration practices. But right now we bring the soil and water sample and plant sample into the lab, and then we analyze. But these filamentous phages, which can be developed as a biosensor, they work in the environment, in the complex environment, in the field itself. You can identify the bacterial cells, 100 cells, 10 cells, and even 1 cell per ml in the field itself. So that means they serve as ultra sensitive and highly environmental biomarker, let me tell you. So that means these framework is you must use bacterial viruses The information is from the nature itself. We have not developed anything in the lab. So to get the benefit at the individual level, population level, and community level, to enhance the ecosystem restoration practices. And once you integrate the socio-biological theories, then you will be able to accelerate the ecosystem restoration to improve the quality of life and trigger the sustainable development. I want my scholars, some of the scholars who are in this university, don't you think you want to be photographed along with these people? I want you in next 10 years, when I give presentation, some of you should have a photograph along with it. These are the billionaire people, let me tell you. I'm sure you would like to be photographed along with them. How you can do it? Ecological entrepreneurship is going to play a significant role. Let me tell you, you will be billionaire in next 10 years if you want to focus on learning the deep science, deep ecology, and converting those ideas into marketable product. Because right now, many companies are emerging, okay, but they are dominated by engineers and MBA, okay, but they don't have what you say trained manpower from ecology and environment. Okay, so if you play a significant role, because you are not trained in marketing and you are not trained in engineering, but you can contribute. So you can be billionaire in next 10 years. Let me tell you, we have opportunity because ecosystems are diversified in India. There are different kind of integrated lands, so there can be different products you can develop to restore the degraded lands or industries or remedify it and so on. So what you can do is, you as a ecological entrepreneurship, you can develop some actionable strategies and policies and technologies, public debate and business engagement. So that means irrespective of your field of research, whether you're environmental psychology or history or social science or economics or ecological science or wildlife science, you can be ecological entrepreneur. Let me tell you, you can influence the household, community, organization, industry, and government, and so that you can develop a harmony between ecology, environment, and economy. What you can serve as a consultant to environment impact analysis. You can serve as consultant to the different pharmaceutical companies to translate the traditional knowledge into the global market. Act as a sustainability consultant, restoration practitioners, and in fact, for cultural biodiversity and spiritual tourism, these are the new avenues because people visit from different parts of the world and for such kind of tourism. Let me tell you, even in urban ecosystems, you can create such green spaces and ecosystem where the cultural biodiversity and spiritual tourism can be practiced. So what benefit society will get? Eco-literate society, and it can prevent the cultural erosion. If we restore ecosystems, it will revive the linkages between the ecosystem, personal excellence, and spiritualism. It will help to restore and conserve the cultural practices, and at the same time, you can generate revenue, you can alleviate poverty, and strengthen the roots of ecological studies in green economy. And the most important part is, I'm sitting in an urban ecosystem, and probably you are also sitting in the urban ecosystem. But there are communities which are directly interacting with these wildlife and ecosystem. They are directly dependent upon it. So the kind of services which we are getting benefit, but there are communities which are directly dependent on those ecosystems. They should be given what is known as conservation basic income. Because ultimately, those, for example, watershed region, maybe your interest as you want water for industry, but those upstream areas in the Himalayas and so on, there are watershed regions. There are native communities who are dependent on those watershed regions and landscape and forest. They want to modify those landscape and forest for their livelihood, but you don't want, because industry will collapse otherwise in the downstream. So industry should provide some kind of basic income to those communities so that rather than they become the custodian of those ecosystem and landscape. So unless we ensure such kind of ideas at the national level, that those communities which are directly interacting with the diversified ecosystems and ecologically relevant site, they should be provided with conservation basic income. So that can also be done. See, ecological entrepreneurship, that means it is nothing but learning from the nature, developing, understanding the problems, and developing nature-based solution to accelerate ecosystem restoration and support the sustainability of industries so that we can design the earth too. Let me tell you. What we want is, there are three things at the end. We should restore, there should be mass movement of degraded restoration of ecosystems, degraded or contaminated ecosystems. There should be long-term monitoring of ecosystem health. And we should adopt the principle and philosophy of practices of ecological entrepreneurship for achieving the goal of sustainable development. So here, our walk ends. Okay, so I took you, all of you, for a short walk about the ecosystem restoration, how it can be useful at the personal level, at the society level, at the national level, and global level, and what are the ideas and opportunities where you can play significant. You can be a leader, let me tell you. learn these tricks, you will lead the global market. You will contribute significantly to society and nation security. Thank you very much. I thank all my students who have worked hard along with me in past more than 20 years. I learned along with them by practicing and doing some research. So I thanks all the resources which contributed to develop such kind of framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sharma, for very informative, wonderful and thought-provoking lecture. You have clearly mentioned that the ecosystem restoration can be the reality. And I know when I was in Delhi University, I have seen you working on different projects related with the restoration of abandoned mines or even lakes and other areas, and there are examples. We know that which degraded ecosystems have been restored. You also mentioned about the ecosystem engineers, about the forest, and especially the soil fertility, or whenever we are going for any restoration, it is very, very important that we should see the conditions and also try to know about the native flora, about the native species which were growing early or in the neighboring areas. And you have already clearly done it practically. So it was a very, very interesting lecture, and I thank you very much for sparing your valuable time. Now we have another speaker, a distinguished person. Normally we see that a person who is working on wildlife, he or she should be a degree in botany, degree in biology, degree in environmental science. But Dr. Kaustubh Sharma is there. But here is a person, a distinguished scholar, who has got his master's degree in physics. And it is a great pleasure for all of us that he belongs to Bhopal. So it is another important aspect, and after getting his degree in physics, he went to BHNS. I think Dr. Shefali will introduce the achievements of Dr. Kaustubh Sharma. And Himalayan snow leopard. It is something very, very interesting. Many of us are not knowing much about the snow leopard, and we will be listening from Dr. Kaustubh Sharma, the first-hand information, first-hand knowledge he has gained going through the Himalayan regions and other parts of the world. Now I would request Dr. Shefali Tripathi to introduce our learned speaker. Your mic is not on. Unmute.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to introduce our eminent guest speaker, Dr. Kaustubh Sharma. Currently, he is working as an Assistant Director of Conservation Policy and Partnership with Snow Leopard Trust, Seattle, USA. Dr. Sharma is an active researcher and international coordinator of the Global Snow Leopard and Ecosystem Protection Program, PhD in Wildlife Zoology from University of. While working with Bombay Natural History, interests are study design, data analysis, conservation biology, and technology. Please share thought and experience.
I'm sorry, I kind of lost your voice, Dr. Shefali, but I believe you asked me to speak now.
You are cordially invited to speak. I think there is
Thank
some
you.
problem at her computer.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let me just see if you can. I hope you can see my screen
Yeah,
and you can hear me well.
clearly visible.
Thank
And
you.
your voice is very clear.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, especially to you, Professor Pandey, for inviting me to this webinar session on the World Environment Day. Now, as much as we would like to celebrate today, celebrate the World Environment Day today, I think we should treat this day as a staunch reminder of what we have done to our planet and what we are going to leave for our future generations. The carnage that the ongoing pandemic is leaving behind, and Dr. Radhesham Sharma mentioned about it briefly, it's not unknown to us. We cannot put a number to the loss of life. We cannot put a value to the loss of life, but we can definitely put a value to the damage that it has done to our economies. And estimates across the world indicate that the cost of the ongoing pandemic to the global economy is somewhere around 28 to 30 trillion dollars. Let's just compare this with the figures that Dr. Sharma mentioned a few minutes ago. Now, various theories are going around. There's an ongoing investigation that goes on, but irrespective of that, whether it jumped from nature through wet markets or which are fueled by illegal wildlife trade, or it was whether it was cultivated in lab, one thing is very clear, that toying with nature is like playing with fire, and it's bound to burn our hands. We've seen this before, we're seeing it right now, and we will continue to see it in the future if we don't change our ways and turn the tide around. I'll take you back to 2017, where the presidents and vice presidents of many countries came together in the city of Bishkek, where the Secretary General of the United Nations spoke about snow leopard conservation, where ministers and speakers from 12 countries, along with prominent business entities and their heads of businesses, came together in a room to talk about snow leopard conservation. This is where celebrities spoke on behalf of hundreds of thousands of signatories towards and for conserving snow leopards. At that point in time, many were surprised. They were in awe. The question was, why should governments be interested in the conservation of a species that lives, in remote mountains? Why should multilateral organizations like the United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Development Program, why should they bother about snow leopards when apparently there are so many other pressing issues to deal with? Why should business heads bother about the deterioration of mountain ecosystems that have very low human density, and also on most occasions they can be considered climatically quite hostile? It is because these mountains provide water to billions of people living downstream. In fact, if you look at the map of, and I'll show you the map in a few seconds, but if you look at the snow leopard range, most rivers originate from the rugged high mountains of Asia, and these rivers have fed and nurtured civilizations for not just a few years, but for millennia. In fact, they are still feeding billions of people from a continent that has 60% of the world's population. It is because the glaciers and the permafrost layer regions of these mountains of Central and South Asia are one of the finest carbon sinks that our planet has, and they not only keep a planet's climate in control, but they have also likely kept numerous viruses and bacteria logged in those glaciers in the ice for millennia. It is because these mountains are also most vulnerable to climate catastrophe that's going around us, affecting livelihoods and human well-being, whether it is the flash floods in Uttarakhand or the extreme winter in Mongolia, the impacts are dramatic and they are costing us life and economy. It is also because cultures and religions across the region have revered this species and the ecosystem. In fact, the species as a custodian of not just the mountains, but entire ecosystems. So much so that conservation of snow leopards through community-based approaches addresses not just 1 or 2, but up to 10 or 13 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that have been defined by United Nations. In a nutshell, snow leopards represent an entire ecosystem that affects the planet and several countries that benefit from nature's services. And it's not a surprise there that when a species or an ecosystem has so much of relevance, and if it is getting threatened by poaching, illegal wildlife trade, mining, poorly planned infrastructure, or just plain stupidity of canned hunting, those at responsible positions must be concerned, and they are concerned. So yes, we agree that policymakers from the world, especially these 12 countries where we find snow leopards, where snow leopards are found, are concerned, must be concerned. How does it affect us? Or let me put it the other way around. Does it really affect us? And to move from policy to you and I'll just give you another simple example, which is based on a recent publication from my colleague, Dr. Ranjani Murli. And in this publication, she investigated some fascinating economics of Pashmina or Kashmir. Now, I believe you all might know about Pashmina. It's a fashionable fiber that is sold at a premium across the world. Roughly, it costs around 7,000 to 12,000 Indian rupees per kilogram. Now, the end product in the form of a shawl, a jacket, or another scarf usually sells at about $50 to $100, which is somewhere around 3,500 to 7,000 to 8,000 rupees. Now, if you just put all of this in weight, the cost of Pashmina as the end product is roughly around $300 to $400 per kilogram, which is around 21,000 to 22,000 rupees per kilogram. Now, obviously, we're not accounting for the craftsmanship, which is something that the craftsman should anyway be getting. So what Ranjani did was she went to two landscapes, Changthang in India and South Gobi in Mongolia. And as one would expect, she found that herders got a much lower fraction of the cost of Pashmina, which is somewhere around 2,500 or 2,800 rupees per kilogram. Remember, it's being sold at 25,000 rupees per kilogram. Herders get a much lower fraction, which is fine. It's a product chain. They're at the starting point of it. So fair enough to some extent, but the staggering figures are quite astounding. What Ranjani did was she estimated the economic value of the ecosystem services such as water, fodder, and shelter and other things that are required to produce 1 kilogram of Kashmir. And what she found was that this value comes to around 35,000 to 50,000 Indian rupees per kilogram. Now, you remember I just mentioned the cost at which we buy it as an end product in the form of a shawl or a jacket or whatever is roughly around 25,000 rupees per kilogram. But the cost of producing Kashmir at the first level is around 35,000 to 50,000 rupees per kilogram. And this is based on standard market values of water and fodder and other ecosystem services. Now, for sure, we are not paying that cost because when we go in the market, we pay only 25,000 rupees for the end product. And of course, there are many layers in between who are utilizing that resource or you're kind of extracting money from that in between. But we need to know for sure that there's someone who's paying for it. And that someone is nature. It's nothing new to say that there are no free lunches. And if nature is being made to pay for something, she'll definitely have her own means to get a payback. So that's just a simple single example of how ecosystem services affect us, or how we are closely linked with those ecosystem services. Now, let's go one step further, closer to the mountains, closer to the nature, because this is more about you and I who are living here in urban spaces. Let's go to those people who live next to the wilderness areas, next to the mountains. And again, a small story about this girl called Kaniki. Now, she lives in the Tian Shan Mountains of Central Asia. Her father makes somewhere around 25,000 rupees a year. In the whole year, that's the amount of money he makes through various activities as a herder. But if I tell you that her family receives ecosystem services in the form of water, fodder, fuel, and several other such commodities, whose market value is roughly 8 to 9 times of what the family makes annually. So when I said 25,000 rupees per year is what they make, they're getting anywhere between $25,000, which is almost 2 lakhs and more from nature, and all of this with free of cost. Then nobody's paying for it. They're getting it all free of cost. Not just that, Kaniki and her family lives next to these glaciers and fragile ecosystems. And as I mentioned earlier, these landscapes are going to be the most rapidly affected by climate change. In fact, they're already facing the brunt in the form of more frequent extreme events and potential exposure when some of these glaciers that have been frozen for hundreds of thousands of years will melt. They will bring pathogens that our immune systems will have absolutely no idea how to deal with. We all know how the COVID has caused havoc because our immune systems had no clue what to do with it. And that's what has caused an immeasurable loss of life and economy. Imagine what else is in the store when some of these frozen surfaces melt in the future. So what do we do? Where is the problem? I think the problem lies in the approach of development for the sake of development. With endless economic growth as the only indicator defining growth set against finite resources, we are already seeing its repercussions. Economic development has been our primary concern in modern times, and the predominant economic model has involved economies of scale, where we want more and more of everything, which in other words, you can say we are relying on unsustainable exploitation of natural resources and ecosystems. Now, let's, for the sake of simplicity, call this development for development model. It has resulted in significant economic gains, but it has also triggered a planetary environmental crisis and mass extinction of species. To firefight the environmental degradation and loss of biodiversity caused by the development for development model, the model that came into existence was conservation for conservation. Or in other words, these conservation programs with the idea of protected areas, which to a reasonable extent have managed to conserve some of our star species, be it the tiger, the wolves, bisons, and so on. The challenge, however, in that case is that these models work in only a few places and on a fewer number of species. For instance, with snow leopards, it's neither possible nor necessary because snow leopards have massive home ranges. One snow leopard, for instance, can have a home range which is as big as Delhi NCR, which is roughly 1,000 square kilometers. And that's how much area one snow leopard can need. To even try to create protected areas that are big enough and are sans people is never going to be practically possible. So a large number of conservation programs, in fact, most of the successful ones being implemented in the snow leopard habitat, they focus on using economic, or let's say economically driven incentives for conservation. These could be community-owned ecotourism programs, insurance programs, community enterprises of producing handicraft, and so on. Now, most of you will appreciate that these are, in their current capacity, at best capable of offsetting losses that people face by sharing by their spaces with wildlife. And they typically contribute to a fraction of the annual average household incomes and needs. So in 2017, when I mentioned in the beginning the forum that took place in Bishkek, we had businesses join in the conversation. And in this conversation, it was important to have brought the businesses on board, because otherwise we always look at them as the main culprits when it comes to environmental losses. This is where the idea of conservation for development started to take shape. We realized this is where we realized that we need to change the conversation about conservation. In other words, we've been talking about development for conservation. What we need to do is we need to flip them, and we need to talk about a new paradigm where we look at conservation as an essential entity to facilitate economic development. How do you do that? One of the means that it can be achieved is through a spatially explicit model. Now, most of you may have known, if you are interested in conservation, or if you've read about conservation, you will notice that most conservation programs stop at the first three levels, the green, yellow, and the orange one. And despite a huge dependence on the remaining elements, with several raps on the knuckles, some businesses start, they're obviously, most of the businesses are at the red zone, and with some effort, they start taking care to some extent about the orange zone. Now, what we really are looking forward to is a transformative, spatially explicit growth model that relies on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Ideally, it should have been a norm already, but it isn't, where it gives us some scope to do something transformative. I'll not really go into the details, but more than happy to respond to queries if there are any. But from a broader pictures, look at it from top to bottom. It's about areas where you need to minimize your interaction with, areas where you need to avoid your interaction with. Then there are areas where you're offsetting the losses. And the last one is where you're talking about restoration. So that's precisely, and the last point becomes a very important one given this today's theme, this year's Environment Day's theme. Now, the approach can not only preserve the ecosystem services stock and promote the flows of ecosystem services sustainably, it may also allow us to use state-of-the-art tools for mapping, valuation, and management of these services to ensure compliance. The end point here, though, the most critical point here, though, is for them to be successful against all odds of currently predominant market-driven forces, climate change, related extremities, future pandemics, which are not going to be surprising if they happen sooner than 100 years, or even economic recessions. What is really crucial for these models is to be inclusive across societal barriers of gender, race, class, religion, and caste. So with that, I'd like to just stop here, leaving you all with some food for thought about the need for an inherent change in how we look at conservation. It's no longer something that we can look at as a hobby or an optional issue to discuss, but it's something that's really, really relevant for our own well-being, self-preservation, as I started with. So as we discussed earlier, we need to change the conversation about conservation, and in line with the theme for this year's World Environment Day, the time to implement ecosystem restoration is now and not tomorrow, not 2 days later, not 5 years later. It's now, else it's already too late. With that, I'd like to stop here and request if you have any questions, please be to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for very interesting lecture, especially on the Himalayan leopard and also the wildlife which is found in different parts of the world, with beautiful photographs and slides and the areas which we visited but we cannot go, but through we have seen many interesting places, and also the development of conservation models and conservation giving. You have given a number of models citing the examples that how it is important that the conservation efforts should be made by the conservation biologists, and the restoration of ecosystem is of prime importance. So for both these speakers, let us give them a big hand. Now there are one or two questions which people have asked. I think Dr. Kaustubh Sharma or Dr. Adhisham Sharma may throw light on that. Mr. Derek Minch from Andaman, he has asked that what is the effect of Corona on environment? Because we are passing through a very crucial phase of Corona pandemic. So what is the impact of the Corona on environment especially?
So I wish there was a simple, direct answer to this. You know, when it started, a lot of people were in their homes and there were these opinions that, oh, nature is healing itself. So soon reports came out that, nope, it's not true. It's not truly healing itself. It's kind of only a temporary, glare in the eye that it's getting better. I think the impacts are going to be multifaceted because of the loss in the economies. Almost every economy will try to bounce back by adding to the exploitation, by not really being as they were not being careful, but they will have even more reasons to be not careful because they have to bounce back with the economy. So I think that's a big fear we all have. On the other hand, it has also shown how nature has the ability to heal itself. So it's opening up a new discourse where people are realizing that maybe this is time that what we are doing is not right. You know, right now we have this one virus which has caused us so much of damage. What if there is another new pandemic which comes in another 10 years? So we need to change the way we are interacting with nature. You know, it can no longer be this exploitative relationship. So, you know, it's multifaceted. I truly hope that we learn from this and we change the way we deal with nature rather than going on an offensive in trying to build back an economy, because economies are dependent right now on finite resources and we cannot infinitely extract them. So I wish I had a much more simpler answer to this, but as I mentioned, there are multifaceted responses and they're all going to be, it's up to us, how do we affect our governments, affect our people around us to bounce back from this.
Dr. Sharma, those who are participating would like to know that how many snow leopard are there? You must have done the counting, and since you are working for a long time. So, and what is the habitat of the snow leopard, especially in India? Snow leopard.
So in India, they're found across the north and northeastern belt from Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Arunachal, and Sikkim. Globally, how many snow leopards? We only know a guesstimate. There could be anywhere between 3,500 to 7,000 snow leopards. But that's only as far as the bad news goes. We, at this point, are working through a global collaboration to estimate the global snow leopard population. Hopefully, by the next 2 years, we should be able to give you a much more confident reply on how many snow leopards. But as of now, we have a rough guesstimate of 3,500 to 7,000.
So thank you very much for
Thank you.
the information you have provided to us. I think Professor Radheshyam Sharma, I don't know whether he's still
He's
there.
had to leave. I think he messaged
Yes,
separately.
he
that
has
he's
another
had to-
lecture, he told me. So, we are very, very happy, and
Thank you.
I'm confident that the participant might have got a lot of information about the snow leopard as well as the restoration of degraded ecosystems, which Professor Radheshyam Sharma he talked about. So, since we are organizing this webinar in collaboration with the National Academy of Sciences Bhopal chapter, I thank the chair and secretary of Nasi Bhopal chapter for their kind support, and also to Professor Dr. Mrs. Manju Sharma, who is Nasi Distinguished Women Scientist, for her encouragement and blessings. On behalf of the Mansarovar Global University, the Chancellor of the University, Mrs. Manju Tiwari, Pro-Chancellor of the University, Engineer Gaurav Tiwari, and on my own, I extend a very warm thanks to both the distinguished and learned speakers, Professor Radheshyam Sharma and Dr. Kaustubh Sharma, and I thank all the participants who were with us in this webinar. So on this World Environment Day, I convey my best wishes, and we all have to work together for the restoration of ecosystem wherever we are. So now we will close this webinar, and thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.